Welcome. I know you all have busy evenings, so I appreciate you coming out and spending time to talk about the redesign. And hopefully we'll make it a worthwhile discussion. I know that it'll be worthwhile from the standpoint of the leadership of the curriculum redesign. We're really looking forward to having these frequent back and forth conversations so that we can make sure that what we do in a redesign represents the will of the community. So welcome to our medical students, and welcome to our basic scientists, and to our clinician faculty, and our community-based faculty, and I see a couple of community members out there too, so welcome. My name is Tim Leahy, and I'm an HIV doctor and an HIV researcher, and I'm the project leader of the curriculum redesign. So I have this, I've started the first slide with a picture of what I thought was a chick coming out of an egg, indicating sort of the birth of a process. And I think as we go through this conversation tonight, you'll see why I chose that as a theme. And partly, for those of you who know me personally, you may know that my wife is sort of a fanatic when it comes to owning chickens. We have a gentlewoman's farm in the backyard, and I'm often called upon to service the chickens. And I feel ambivalent about the grown chickens, but I really like the chicks because there's endless possibilities. You know, is that a black Australorp? Is that a buff Orpington? Is that a New Hampshire red? I don't exactly know. Do I know if the gender of this chick? I don't know. It's just coming into being, and so I think you'll see that's an appropriate image for tonight. But as I was standing here shaking in my shoes, a friend came up and said, "Well, is this about a chicken and the egg? Is that the question here, or which came first?" And I think actually in our conversation we'll see that that's probably an appropriate interpretation of this too, that we're going to talk a lot tonight about how you have to begin someplace thinking about ideas, but you also have to think about what your resources are and what your capacity is and what's appropriate, and then go back and forth. You think about what the bright ideas are, think about how it's appropriate for Dartmouth, and we'll try to have this be one back and forth of many. So, tonight, I'm going to spend about half of the time on the first two agenda items. I want to give a brief update on where we are in the redesign process, and then talk about a first draft of the framework of the redesigned curriculum. But most importantly is the last item. I want to make sure that if you have questions, if you have ideas, that we have a chance for real back and forth. So first, why? We want to prepare our medical students to be the leaders of 2020. We want to prepare them for the new medical practice, or really the new medical practices that they're going to encounter. We want them to be knowledgeable and curious. We want them to be excellent collaborators, critical thinkers. We want them to be truly professional in their work behavior. And we also want them to innovate and lead. And so we're thinking of a curriculum that achieves those things. But beyond those larger goals that would pertain in any particular year, there is increasing urgency to do this redesign now. And some of the factors are listed here. One is our learners. Our learners have been telling us that there are parts of the curriculum that they really love and enjoy and cherish, and we'll talk about that. But there are also other parts that they would like us to change, and so that's one motivator, is to try to suit their needs as adult learners. But practice is changing. This is a big piece of it, is that when the sort of the traditional medical school approach was designed in 1910 by Abraham Flexner, medical practice looked like one thing, and now, more than 100 years later, things have changed substantially. This medical school has changed substantially in the intervening years, of course, but people are asking this question of how does the current approach to medical education prepare students for the practice that they will be in 2020, and can we sort of do a better job of getting there? We also have, importantly, many of you know that the LCME site visit is coming, and that many people on the faculty are scrambling to get all the paperwork ready. And in that process, they're asking the questions of, are we ready to meet the accreditation requirements of the school? Are there parts of the curriculum that we would like to match LCME requirements even better? And then in this context of changing LCME requirements, there's also an ongoing dialogue every year about what medical education should look like. And the last 10 or 15 years have seen a lot of different changes and what's becoming accepted as the standard of medical education. And so responding to that dialogue is another important thing to do. And then, as you know, this curriculum redesign was initiated by Chip Shoba, the dean. So what are the things that Dartmouth students and, I as a Dartmouth faculty member, you too, I imagine, love about this institution that we want to make sure that we preserve and even amplify in this kind of a process? What is the thing that we are that we have to make sure we don't lose sight of? So, I'd have to apologize for the ridiculously hard to read text on the slide if I listed all of the things, and that's one of the things about our teaching approach that we're going to change. But some major ones are our collaborative community. One of the reasons a lot of us came here, a lot of students came here and faculty, is this intimacy, the ability to work with a known community of people. And that's something I think we can leverage and make sure we protect with all we're worth. We have world-class teachers. I've been humbled, particularly this year, meeting many more teachers than I had met before at the quality of teaching here in many, many contexts. And how to make sure that we help support those teachers is a really big piece of this. We need to make sure that at the end of this process, they are even more enthused than they are now, if that's possible, and even better supported. Healthcare delivery science is a clear, internationally prominent piece of the Dartmouth portfolio, and leveraging that prominent, excellent program for the benefit of our medical students is a non-brainer. There are, of course, other graduate programs as well, and they are a key piece of this. But I think one, sort of growing sense of unease people have had over the years is watching the excellence of DMS and the excellence of TDI and thinking, how can we harness those two together in the service of our medical students' career development? Another piece that Joe O'Donnell has brought a lot to the conversation is what is the product? What is it that the medical students can be out of the kind of curriculum that we really should make? And one of the big things that residency program directors feed back to us about medical students is that our students are citizens. They are well-trained, they are insightful, they are proud of their education. And one thing I think this collaborative community builds in them is that sense of citizenship on the wards and with their peers, and we want to make sure we sort of help amplify that piece of them. And in so doing, we will design an innovative curriculum that optimizes medical student education and sets a global standard for medical education. So I've shown this slide before, and so tonight, hopefully we can talk about some, in a greater degree of specificity about some ideas about how to get there. So getting down to a little bit greater level of detail, what are some of the aspects of a redesigned curriculum that have sort of catalyzed the consensus that we do have? So we all think it's very important for our students to be able to work with the patient in front of them and have that personal, professional relationship with them. But also we want to make sure that they can see that interaction in the context of population-based medicine. We want to make sure that as they're acquiring their clinical and their basic sciences skills, that those lessons are delivered in a more integrated fashion. Currently, the medical students have clinical context for some of their basic science teaching, but a common comment is that clinical context could be improved. And currently, in later years of the curriculum, the students are immersed in clinical experience, and there isn't as much exposure to the basic science faculty as they get in the early years, and both of those could probably be brought together to a happy medium. Interactive teaching is the kind of teaching that many studies have shown results in the greatest learning in adults. And so if we can harness that sort of power in our education with the world-class teachers we have, that's a winning combination. We want to train people to be leaders and to be scholars and experts. We value people being sort of on the wards, on the front lines, doing the clinical work, but we believe that the awesome students who come to Dartmouth Medical School can also be leaders in that context, and that we really should prepare them to be that way and help them be specifically trained in that. We want to nurture their professionalisms. Ethics and humanities are a really key piece of the medical school curriculum and also a required piece of the medical school curriculum. We want to build that out to make sure it really does nurture their professionalism in effective teaching ways. And then this is a lot of change. And I wrote on this slide that student well-being is a high priority, that as we're sort of facilitating this sort of change, we need to make sure that front and center is student well-being, that we do this in a way that really pays attention to that. But I think, reflecting on it here, that's equally true of the faculty. The faculty are, like the students, under stress. These are times of change, and even if it wasn't sort of a weird part of the century, any change is stressful, and we need to make sure we nurture all of our well-being in the process. So what are the first steps we're taking? So let me give you a timeline of some of the events that have happened to date so that we're all on the same page. So cognizant of his passion to effect curriculum redesign at Dartmouth, Dean Shoba impaneled some outside consultants to come and look at Dartmouth Medical School to see what our strengths are, see what we could improve on, and view those things in the context of some of the educational changes that we've been talking about. And that they were solicited in late 2010, and then in 2011, we received their report detailing a number of the changes that we'll talk about tonight. Knowing that that change was coming, the students, I think, did the best job of activating a set of leaders that then did an awesome job of reaching out to their classmates and getting a sense of their concerns, getting a sense of their questions, feeling out what they were excited about and what they were fearful about. And they continue to do that to this day. And I think that's been a real model for me. It's been something that's really made me say, wow, that's the kind of conversation we need to be in. We've had a town hall 3 months ago, and there's this town hall, another one in a month, and this is the back and forth conversation I hope to have over the coming months. In the summer of 2011, it felt like it was time to get some momentum and move this forward, and so the dean formed the Curriculum Redesign Task Force. This is a group of about 40 or 50 faculty and students, not solely at Dartmouth Medical School, but with a bunch of collaborators from TDI and Tuck and other parts of the Dartmouth community, just coming together in the beginning to just discuss what are some of these concepts we're talking about, what are the needs, what are the areas where we could really improve, and to try to catalyze change and to hear from you what you were interested in and try to move this forward. The leaders of that, of the Curriculum Redesign Task Force are John Butterly and Joe O'Donnell, who I don't think was able to come here tonight. And they brought together a really impressive group of people that I've learned a lot from, and I'll try to show you some of the pieces of the work that they did in this early phase, sort of taking nebulous ideas and moving them into specific action. So one of the big pieces that I'm sure you know about is the the nationwide effort to recruit a new senior associate dean for medical education. Dave Nierenberg, who's in the back, is the senior associate dean for medical education, and as many of you know, and as I've been learning from him over the last few years in the medical education committee, he's been a huge figure at this institution and catalyzed the previous redesign of the medical education curriculum and has worked with, I think, shrinking resources to make the Dartmouth curriculum the excellent curriculum it is. But Dave was interested in letting the leadership of this curriculum redesign go to some fresh blood that wanted to take that new curriculum redesign task on while he is in the position now keeps the curriculum going, and as many of you know, he continues to reform the curriculum to make it better. And so that nationwide senior associate dean for medical education search is ongoing, and there have been repeat visits, and I think it's really moving forward apace. We, in the Curriculum Redesign Task Force, moved from some basic ideas to, with the leadership of Kathy Pipus, catalyzing a vision. Specifically, what was it that we were talking about? Some of the slides I began this with was really important to kind of pin ourselves down to, so that as we move forward with getting in the specifics, we don't forget that vision. Oh yes, we really want to make sure we protect student well-being. We really need to harvest the strengths of the Dartmouth faculty and community. Brian Reed, I know he's here tonight, back there. Oh, there you are, Brian. Did a spectacular job getting a Blackboard site for the curriculum redesign going, so that we could share documents, so that we could collaborate together online. And that has, as you'll see, transitioned into a web page that everybody can access. And I'll give you the information on that. There's a lot of medical literature out there, and so there were a bunch of people, including Joe O'Donnell and Ann Davis, who really sort of helped lead what was everybody's sort of private literature search, but they really brought a lot of the leading articles out to sort of say, you really need to consider this in the process. We did a lot of brainstorming on the basis of that stuff, looking at what might different frameworks for curriculum look like. It turns out that there are a number of different institutions that have redesigned their approach to medical education in a lot of different ways, and they've really done it in different ways. And so how might we do it? We've done a lot of brainstorming, thinking about different models for that, and those lead to the things we'll talk about tonight. Rand Swenson and Ann Davis led an effort to analyze those other schools' curriculums in detail, interviewing people who had led those curriculum redesign efforts to say, well, what sort of informed this particular approach, or what did you try that really didn't work, so that we can know to try to avoid that in our context, or what did you learn in the process that we could use to jumpstart the process. So that was invaluable, and a lot of that documentation is going to be available for everybody soon. There was a group of people under Chip's guidance who have initiated you can imagine, very complicated process of figuring out what sort of resources would be available and necessary for this kind of a complicated process. And then following on our work, helping catalyze the vision, Kathy Pipus has taken the helm in the communications piece, sort of making sure that each basic science department did have somebody come to them and talk and hear your concerns and feed those back to the group, and that there was sort of a communications plan articulated, and as you'll see, their group has been instrumental in putting up the website. So these are some of the key milestones that occurred in the fall and early 2012 here that I wanted to highlight, and partly just to give you a sense of this is sort of what's been happening behind the scenes as the effort becomes increasingly more visible. And you'll see as I show you the leadership structure that these efforts are sort of crystallizing into something that you'll see more and more of. So here's the web page. It's linked to the Inside DMS site. The URL is down here. This is the product of a lot of work. It has this homepage that just sort of describes some of the big picture concepts in the redesign. But then if you notice, there are a bunch of links down here, and a really important one is the frequently asked questions page. We've solicited a bunch of questions from students and faculty, distilled those down into sort of what were the common themes in those questions, and answered those up on the web page so that you can go there. And you'll see also that in addition to being able to talk to us in person, there's also an email address that you can go to shoot questions to us. We'll make sure that as new themes emerge, we get those up on the FAQ page and answer those. So yes, we'll have these town halls, but we'll also have the ability to go back and forth in that context. So if you have ideas or questions, definitely hit us up in person or like this. There are also links to the working groups. We wanted to make sure that it was really clear if you had a particular idea or concern that you wanted to bring and you're thinking, well, who would be the right leader to go to? I'm thinking about something that has to do with the clinical context. Well, who would that be? And that information is up there. So, and the whole purpose of this is to make sure that we have a good apparatus, not solely for doing the work. I actually think you could probably take a curriculum redesign and have 5 really hardworking people, shut them in a room and lock the door, and every once in a while throw some food in, and they could design a curriculum. But that's not the curriculum that anybody in this room wants. We want to make sure that this is a truly collaborative curriculum. And I think it takes people who you can touch base with, who can touch base with you to really have that conversation. So, what does the leadership apparatus look like? So if you picture it as a house, the dean is the roof. There's the senior associate dean for medical education for the redesign process. I'm not suggesting, Dave, that you're to be announced, but that the redesign leadership from the senior associate dean is being recruited. There's the executive leadership team. That's Dean Shoba, and then Joe O'Donnell and John Butterly, and I come and report back to them to get their leadership. There's the curriculum redesign task force that I mentioned of faculty and from basic and clinical sciences and students and people from other institutions who are collaborating. And then there are a bunch of different working groups. Each working group is basically formed to try to capture a piece of the redesigned curriculum, to have a group of people who really go deep into that and become the experts in that part of it, but then to come back and share their knowledge with others. So let me show you some of the pieces of the foundation of the house. So really, really importantly, there's the pedagogies, assessment, and learning technologies group led by Leslie Fall and Jenny Reed and Brian Reed and Karen Schifferdecker. I originally started as just those two, and then they added in the other two, and I realized I just couldn't make that legible, but Karen Schifferdecker, Brian Reed, Jenny Reed, and Leslie Fall are the leaders of that group. And this is in recognition of the fact that it is critically important not only just to design a syllabus, but to think about the effective ways to deliver the syllabus. And not just how to direct the syllabus, but who is directing the syllabus. You know, I think I do a pretty good job in my classes teaching about HIV and pneumonia, but I have never been trained to be an educator. I don't have expertise in that. I've done it. 7 years ago, my section chief suggested that I do this lecture, and I said yes, because I knew I'd be in trouble if I didn't, and I give the lecture. But there are experts in this who can and teach all of us how to be more effective and be better prepared to meet the educational challenges. And I think that's particularly important if we're thinking about different models of education. Well-being, I mentioned that faculty and student well-being is an incredibly important piece of this, and we wanted to make sure that we had experts in this who could really think about not only how are students and well-being addressed by the curriculum, but how can we support their well-being as we go through a curriculum redesign. And so Ann Davis is leading that excellent group. I'm working with Bill Nelson of TDI, who's very prominent ethicist who's mentoring me in a group that's discussing, how do we build out the ethics and humanities portion of the curriculum? There's bioethics and literature and art and anthropology and many fields in the medical humanities that really speak to who we are as humans and professionals in interaction with our patients. And not only is that, I think, an important part of our professional formation to sort of to think about that explicitly and discuss it and work through it in the stress of a medical career. But I also think those are incredibly effective teaching tools. And I'm sure many of you as teachers have experienced this, and many of the students among you have experienced this. When stories happen in the classroom, when I start talking about not just the different enzymes that antiretroviral drugs target in the HIV life cycle, but my 35-year-old patient who just found out that he had HIV infection in the hospital with his first pneumonia, you just care more. And I think that's another role for the medical humanities is to make sure that we're effective teachers. Rand Swenson of Anatomy runs the core curriculum group that's tasked with the daunting task of taking the basic science expertise at this institution and the clinical science expertise and merging them together more so that teams of clinicians and basic scientists deliver a truly integrated curriculum that puts basic science in its clinical context most effectively and puts clinical teaching in a basic science pathophysiological framework. Greg Ogrintz is working with his group on the formation of a master's program. How do we foster the students' ability to go into the diversity of different careers that they get into, and how do we help them emerge as leaders and scholars in those fields? And how do we do that in the context of a medical school experience that's appropriate to medical school. Nan Cochran is working with a group on longitudinal clinical curriculum, designing a curriculum that would get students into the clinic earlier and keep them in clinical experiences throughout the medical experience in a way that's integrated with the rest of the curriculum, and we'll talk about how that might work. Faculty development, I mentioned, is a piece of pedagogies, assessment, and learning technology. But as many of you know, the faculty development extends beyond just the medical school. That our teachers at the medical school are not just DMS faculty. They're also residents and fellows, and they're also a diversity of people in this building, in Lebanon, and around New England, and even in California, who are our students' teachers. And so faculty development is really something that transcends just the redesign and extends to CME and GME and many parts of the Dartmouth community. And there are many facets of the faculty development apparatus here. There are people who really are experts in this and devote a lot of their time and expertise to that. Well, how do we try to bring these people together and work in concert? And so Leslie Fall is tasked with sort of reaching out to the different resources we have here and learning what they are and moving that effort forward of bringing everybody into the room and working together. And then lastly, I mentioned that Kathy Pipus is leading the communications group. This is a group that can reach out to all the different departments, can receive your input, can get the web page up there, can help me not trip on my toes when I'm standing up here, and generally just make sure that the two-way communication is open. And then to make sure that we're not having these groups working independently without collaborating with each other, we have a working group leadership team that is formed of all the leaders of the teams working together with me to sort of make sure that we're unifying this in a process that makes sense, and that, for instance, as Ran is thinking about the core curriculum, he's thinking about it in concert with Nan and the clinical curriculum and all the other pieces together. Importantly, I had room in this box to mention student representatives. So all of the working groups here had to have a particular confirmation. We wanted to make sure that we had good basic scientist representation. We wanted to make sure we had good clinician representation. And really important, this is not for the faculty, this is for the students. We wanted to make sure that we wanted to have students on each of the groups. We started by appointing the students who were on the curriculum redesign task force, who had signaled that they were interested in this deeply. But the students brought to us that it was really important to them to make sure this was really a truly representative process. So Valerie Jacobs, the student body president, helped with Jess and some others to come together and sort of propose a system where we could solicit students for each of the working groups and other tasks in the redesign, and they would send out a solicitation to the whole student body, and they could have a more representative recruitment process, and that's been really helpful. So we have to date more than 100 students and faculty working on this group. We have each of the different working groups here, and their membership. As of a couple of days ago, I told people that this was that I was putting this up today, and actually on my way over here, I noticed that I had another email. So I apologize. This is a few hours out of date. But I want to point out that these groups contain clinician and basic scientist faculty and students. But one thing that we were reflecting on as we looked in the membership of these groups, that basic scientists could be better represented. And this is something we genuinely want. And so one thing I'd really urge you, if you are a basic scientist and you're interested in getting involved, I would love to help figure out what would fit your interests. And it's something that the working group leaders are actively working on, is making sure these are truly representative groups. We have groups now for the first phase of the process that I'll describe in a little more detail. But this is not going to be 2 months and done. This is going to take a while. We want to make sure that over the long run we've got the right groups. Okay, so in November we formed this leadership team, and following that, I originally said working groups working like dogs, because they've really been working hard. I think they can all attest to that. These are people who, like you, have full-time jobs and have been meeting really frequently and juggling a lot of schedules to work hard to get the first phase done for this. So thanks from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure watching this level of dedication. I kind of wish you could see these people who are really busy and have fruitful, fulfilling careers really set a lot of stuff aside or just juggle a lot of stuff and work like crazy on this. So I mentioned that we had sort of a draft framework, and then the working groups each sort of took that early draft that a group of us had put together and really made it their own and figured out how it ought to be in the context of their sort of deeper dive into the material. I mentioned that Kathy's group had been working a lot on some of the community outreach and the FAQ that I mentioned. There's also been a contest to name the curriculum, and I've had a couple people come up and tell me their great ideas, and this is really cool. And then also the Dean Madden and Leo. I don't see Leo here yet, but they've both led an effort called the Extreme Curriculum Makeover with the students, soliciting for them not an extreme home makeover, but sort of their ideas on how they would make over the curriculum. What would they particularly focus on? And as of last week, I had heard that there are 28 different entries, and so I think the competition is going to be fierce for this, and that's just the way I want it. I want to make sure we have that. And I have to say, my goal is not to pick the top idea. Our goal is to pick the best ideas. And the Senior Associate Dean search continues. So here we are today, having a town hall. The first time I showed this, somebody told me that it suggested that I was interested in the audience sitting there and listening to me. And so let me just be explicit. This isn't me, I guess. It's not me in a skirt. Don't worry. But I wouldn't show my white legs this far into winter. But anyway, that's me listening to you guys shortly. So we will take your ideas and your concerns back, and so I really want to hear this, and we will put these into our understanding of what's important. We're doing this with our working groups now and actively changing the draft with the goal of bringing to Chip and the executive leadership a proposal. And the proposal, due in March, is about the teams who will redesign the curriculum and their rough charge. Not the curriculum, because it's too early. We haven't had time. We haven't asked you enough times what you'd like. We haven't heard enough. We want to make sure we're just beginning that conversation. But who's going to be asking those questions, and exactly what roughly are they looking at? Because it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of detail in this. For each of you who have designed a syllabus for one class, it's a daunting effort. We're talking about an entire curriculum, so it takes time to do this, and we want to make sure we do it right. I think in my, for instance, in my fourth year capstone course, Advanced Medical Sciences, each year I try to change the syllabus that was largely developed by Don St. Germain, who is here today. And I sort of make little tweaks, and I can do that without sort of upsetting the ship of my workload. But I think when you really get into a brand new course, it takes a huge amount of time, and if you do that across the board, you gotta go deep, and you have to be resourced to do that, and so that's the hope. So, a draft curriculum framework. I'm almost done with some of the caveats, I swear to God. So, before I give you a diagram, I want to talk about some things that cannot be diagrammed. When I've trialed this conversation out, I realized that when I sort of show what roughly it might look like at a 1,000-foot level, it's sort of hard to represent some of the concepts that I think a lot of us hold near and dear. And so let me hit those first, and then we'll look at the diagram. So one is the importance of two-way communications. That is key for us. So none of this is set in stone. This is all a draft, and I want your edits. Shifting content and delivery, and not just adding. This is probably the thing we've heard the loudest from the students. The students are super busy. There is so much information being thrown at them. I saw one student showed me a picture when she was capturing this of somebody with their face sort of CGI'd to expand around a huge fire hose, and it looked like she was just sort of swallowing this huge hose full of water. That's what it feels like to memorize the amount of information that they're confronting every day. That is appropriate. There's a lot of information out there. We all want it to be challenging, including the students. But if we're proposing adding new things, like a master's program, or adding new ways of delivering that message, it is critically important to think strategically about, are there things that we are teaching currently that maybe are something that we could have them learn offline when they need it in the clinical context and not memorize up front. And we need to make room for the stuff that we put in. We can't have them working 169 hours a week. It has to be, everybody has heard about the master's program, and I think that's one of the things that's generated the most conversation. And, I think what's emerged out of that is the necessity to balance. That on one hand, this has to be an outstanding master's program. We can't invest all of this and have it be middling. This has to be outstanding. And we have the resources to do that. We have outstanding faculty who can deliver the material we're talking about. But at the same time, this has to be delivered in the context of a medical school curriculum. And so it's not the same as a standalone master's program in which you just define the duration of the master's program and call it a day. This is something that has to be integrated into a medical school career, and so therefore it has to be achievable. It has to be something that's realistic. And exactly how to go between that Scylla and that Charybdis is going to be the product of a lot of work, but we have to keep our eyes on those two priorities. One important piece is that many of our students do take more than the traditional 4 years to complete medical school. And so while I'm going to show you what 4 years would look like, we are talking about a curriculum that's as flexible as the curriculum today that allows students to do double degree programs, to split, to remediate, to do whatever it is that informs people taking more than 4 years. So what are some of the key educational themes for students that come out that I also can't diagram very effectively? So one is an emphasis on effective teaching techniques. Currently, if you look at the web page, you can sort of see a diagram of SBM or of the clinical clerkships. And I will show you sort of a similar level draft diagram of a redesigned curriculum. But really importantly, you can't diagram a shift from a lecture-based approach to a particular topic area to more of an interactive, small group-based, blended learning sort of approach. And so I think it's important to say that kind of change in delivery informed by the Pedagogies Assessment and Learning Technologies group is very much a piece of the conversation, but it won't show up on the diagram. I mentioned the focus on well-being, student well-being. Kathy Pipus has also taken on the task of assessing what our advising resources are here, assessing what our advising strengths are, and working with the people who are leading the advising approach to make sure that we think about incorporating that into the existing experience as well as the redesign experience. I mentioned our interest in professionalism. I'm not going to show you a box on the curriculum that pertains to professionalism specifically, because it's going to be woven throughout and it's something we care a lot about, but it's not one little purple box. There has to be time for some of the external pressures that medical students need to address. They need to have time to study for boards and take the boards. They need to have time in their 4th year to go out and interview for the residency programs that are going to match first in, and we know we have to think about that. I've learned a lot from Dave Nierenberg and Eric Shirley over the last couple of months about the careful calculus that goes into changing the duration of clerkship, for instance, and how that affects student ability to take care of some of these things. And we know there's some careful calculus ahead that relates to that. For faculty, this is a really important piece. I've mentioned integration of clinical and basic science, and I think that there are clinicians who can imagine how to take the basic science that they feel comfortable with and integrate it into what they know as teachers. And there are also basic scientists who feel comfortable doing the flip side of that, of taking the basic science that they feel comfortable with the clinical stuff and doing it like that. And that's really not how we envision it. We envision teams, those people with complementary interests and overlapping skill sets coming together to make the curriculum together. Protected time for teaching is really important. You get what you pay for. The quality of the teaching is related to whether the person has time to formulate an intelligent lecture plan and have time to meet with the students and have time to really do the stuff of teaching. And at the highest levels, Dean Shoba and all the way down, everybody is really strongly focused on that. Strong faculty development, I mentioned, is incredibly important. So penultimate, before doing the framework stuff, is more about faculty development. So faculty development, you know, it's sort of a vague term, and I'm not going to do it justice in you know, one slide and a few lines on other slides, but you know, this of course stretches across all of the different pieces of the teaching interaction. This isn't just how not to say as much as I do in a talk. This is, you know, much deeper than that. This is about effective delivery, about effective evaluation, about giving feedback, about the whole package of doing teaching. And this is also not a one-time thing. You can't make me better by giving me a 1-hour lecture and then walking away, and that's the end. And I would argue also that making all of the faculty development sort of loosely available to the people who are, you know, passionate enough to go seek it out is also not good enough, that it needs to be front and center and a big piece of our careers as faculty, to make sure that we really are cutting edge as faculty, that we really buff ourselves every year. You know, teaching is valued in the promotion process, and I know that Leslie Henderson and the others who work on the promotion process do take that into consideration. But valuing those people who devote substantial pieces of their careers to teaching our students and to developing new curriculum innovations is important. And we want to make sure that we have, in addition to this lovely auditorium, many other technologies to support our teaching. So let me get into the meat of the conversation, sort of a sketch of the framework and how we envision it might look, and then let's have a conversation about it. So I want to show you a draft framework from the point of view of a couple of different students. And the point behind this is to show you that there is flexibility in this curriculum. So there will be a student here who I'll depict who is not planning on taking the master's program, and then there will be a student here who I depict who elects to take the master's program. Both students, all students, will take an introductory course called the Introduction to Medicine. This is a course that's been done at many other institutions that combines together the many fields that are necessary to take in medical school: clinical sciences, basic sciences, healthcare delivery sciences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and gives them introductory vocabulary, introductory concepts, sort of the foundation. You know, because I think we all know that our students show up with different levels of exposure to different things. Some have worked in basic science labs for many years and are really hot on signal transduction pathways. Others have been EMT and their exposure has been much more clinical. Well, what do each of them need to sort of get on the same page educationally? A longitudinal clinical curriculum is a key piece of the curriculum redesign. The idea of, instead of students pausing to get into real in-depth clinical experiences until the third year of medical school, is something we want to sort of push back and say, students come to medical school to be doctors, and we want to make sure they get patient contact early on. So we envision, I'm going to repeat this message, that this is not a proportionate calendar, so how many months is that? I'm not sure. But we like the idea of early on, well into the first year of medical school, that students get their first of an ongoing longitudinal clinical experience. But that longitudinal clinical experience evolves over time as suits their developmental evolution. The idea is that early on you would have sort of more of, you know, if you sort of tried to plop a student in, I don't know, the 4th month of the first year onto the wards, like we put them on the wards now in the 3rd year, they wouldn't really have learned the basic language of medicine that they would need to thrive in that educational context. But there are lots of clinical skills that they could learn and that they could be useful in practice as learning earlier than that. So some institutions have had students do medical assistant positions in clinics where they're rooming patients, taking blood pressures and other vital signs, getting a basic chief complaint, learning how the system works, facilitating the flow of clinic, hooking patients up with needed clinical resource specialists, et cetera. And that's the sort of early clinical work that students could learn from and be useful doing. And then as their skill set emerges and they become more competent as clinicians, then they jump into the longitudinal outpatient-based clinical curriculum where they're in the community working with community preceptors, faculty who are their mentors over time with an augmentation of a small group mentorship that follows that through. Knowing that this longitudinal clinical experience also has immersion experiences, that there is value in, for instance, spending up to 80, but no more than 80 hours a week in the surgical clerkship, learning the immersion of the cardiothoracic surgery or the general surgery, attending life, and that immersion experience, whether it's in the inpatient context or in an outpatient context, is critically valuable, and so that gets integrated into the longitudinal clinical time. Well, so if a student is in a longitudinal clinical context and has, say, for example, one concept is their own panel of patients that they share with their attending mentor. This is not written in stone, but an idea that's been tossed out. How would it work, if they're in a inpatient, clinical time, really immersed on the surgical clerkship, for instance? I'm not sure. That's the kind of specific detail that we really need to work out in collaboration. So there'll be longitudinal experiences, integrated immersion experiences in inpatient and outpatient required clinical experiences and elective experiences of both sorts. And everybody does that. And not everybody does it in exactly the same order. There's still the same sort of flexibility that you would have anyway. What's next? I want to emphasize that vacation is important. The students, the students find me in dark alleys and tell me that if we leave this kind of stuff off, which is easy to do when you're jamming a curriculum full of a lot of stuff, we get in trouble, and I might not emerge from that dark alley. So I don't have room on this slide to leave this green bar in there, but vacation is in the diagram. Imagine it's there. The other important piece that a lot of students have really been sort of signaling to us, and Ann Davis and Joe O'Donnell and others have been real champions of, is the importance of students having time together across all 4 years. That's a really important sort of reinforcing social experience to sort of share experiences, to share war stories. But also a mentorship experience. This is an opportunity for fourth-year students to sort of pass on pearls to students who are just about to hit an immersion rotation that the fourth year's been through. This is an opportunity, if there's an extracurricular project that students are working on, to pass off leadership from senior students to junior students. This is really important to them, and we think it's an important thing to build into the new schedule. And that might occur at different parts of the curriculum that we have not worked out the details on. Boards preparation, I mentioned, is really important. The students, whatever we do with our curriculum, the students have to jump through the board's hoop. What the boards will require is changing. They are responding to the same changes in educational approaches that we are, and the same desire to make sure that the boards really reflect the kind of student that graduates into an effective physician. The MCATs have changed, the boards are changing, and we have to make sure that we give the students preparation for that and time to study and take it. So I'm going to take those off of the diagram just for the sake of clarity, but imagine those colored stripes are still woven in there. The integrated biomedical curriculum. This is the core curriculum that I told you Rand Swenson is leading with his group. This is where the integration of clinical and basic sciences following on to the Introduction to Medicine course happens. This is where teams of basic scientists and clinicians work together. Importantly, this does not end when the immersion clinical experiences begin. I don't know exactly what that time point is, but when we sort of segue from intensive emphasis on this to intensive emphasis on this, our goal is to bring these together and to really make good on the intent of keeping basic science in the later clinical years. I remember when I was learning ICU care and thinking about pressors and why amiodarone was good for this heart arrhythmia and not this other one, that basic science pathophysiology was missing from my medical training at another institution that will not be named. This is our intent, to build this into the immersion experiences so that pathophysiology is still part of the active conversation there. The point here is not to have it be a separate slot that's sort of added on to students' days separate from their clinical experience, but to weave it in collaboration with the clerkship and clinic directors to make sure it's a useful and effective teaching experience. This also has to be integrated with the clinical curriculum. So I mentioned that, not only are students in this longitudinal experience, but they also have small group mentorship to sort of say, well, how was that? You diagnosed your first case of diabetes. How did you handle that? And sort of working on small topics and small groups over time. Well, those topics that are in the small group have to be coordinated with the delivery of this. There's going to be some flexibility because what students see in clinic is inherently unpredictable. But if you can sort of work on their evolution, their development over time, in collaboration, I think both curricula will be more effective. So as I said, I know that this curriculum is designed to take 4 years to finish, but the juncture here is left flexible. We've talked about, should this be, for instance, this integrated biomedical curriculum focus, should it be less than 2 years? What would that imply logistically? What would be some of the consequences of that? How would we make sure that that fit our clinical capacity? That's part of the ongoing conversation that we're having now. But one thing I want to talk about is, if you sort of looked in this blue box a little bit more, I want to introduce the idea that Ran and his group have been talking about of blocks and threads. And the idea here is that really, if you have a truly integrated curriculum, you sort of weave these two things together to make sure that the different topics are well coordinated with each other. So let me talk a little more about what I mean by blocks and threads. So the idea is that you would have these vertical blocks. There would be topic areas that are similar to the topic areas that are taught today, but perhaps of a wider focus, more integration between fields, the cardiovascular system maybe, or infectious diseases, immunology, and inflammation as just sort of examples. But lots of different blocks going across here vertically. Ran and his group have talked about the specifics of what some of these things would be, but nothing's finalized. And that this would be, there would be block directors that would be teams of clinicians and basic scientists work together to deliver this material. And that then other topics are more amenable to sort of longitudinal integration into all different topics, that it might be most appropriate to sort of weave them in and have threads that weave into this with thread directors that collaborate with these different blocks to sort of make sure that the material is taught effectively. Might John Butterly teach in cardiology and teach about some of the cardiovascular drugs that he would use managing somebody with valvular heart failure? Absolutely, but would he do it in collaboration with Dave Nierenberg talking about the pharmacology? That's the goal of this sort of a structure. So you would have, maybe there would be a healthcare delivery sciences thread, another thread, another thread. And we've talked about some ideas about what those threads would be, but not committed specifically to others because that's the ongoing conversation. Okay, so what else? There's the Masters. The Masters is the opportunity for our students to obtain additional expertise and scholarship opportunities in some of the topics that we really want to make sure we highlight as the strength of the Dartmouth community. Healthcare delivery science, global health, social justice, biomedical innovation. These are things that we could really sort of soup up in the curriculum. These are topics that are required by the LCME, but these are also strengths at Dartmouth that we can really highlight and make this a curriculum that attracts students that are interested in this. So wait a second though, there's green in both of these things. So the idea is that there are integrated threads of these topics from the master's material woven into the integrated biomedical curriculum and integrated with clerkship and the other immersion experiences to get all of our students access to that required important topic material. So they will all have that exposure to that important material. There will also be a small group series, sort of analogous to the small group series that would happen with the longitudinal clinical experience, but oriented toward this material to sort of make sure there's that interactive and mentored process. And everybody gets that. It's woven into the rest. So really what you see is the big curriculum with lots of threads and blocks woven in. Well, what does a master's student do differently then? The master's has electives and seminars and more in-depth material around those topics after selecting a track. That all master's students have sort of a core master's material, But different students will choose different areas of concentration. I might be interested in global health and social justice, so I could pick that track. I would share with my classmates the same master's material and then in-depth material on that particular track. That material is integrated here with the rest of the seminar, but it's really distinct from what the people who decide not to do the master's take. There is elective content, and an important example of this sort of flexibility is that students, we want to make sure students have a scholarly product coming out of this. And what do I mean? This could be that they work with their community practice. Let's say this is a medical student who's interested in family practice. So they're working in the community, maybe emphasizing their family practice preceptorship as a key clinical experience. They're also thinking about quality assurance activities that they could use, that they could do in that context, and they could use the training they're getting from TDI and TDI-affiliated faculty to sort of figure out how do you, not just kind of how do you do it off the top of your head like I do it in my clinic, but what's the actual system for doing this kind of work in a clinic, and what's the formal way of evaluating a system and improving it and assessing your results. And this would be an opportunity for them to develop that kind of scholarship. Equally, you could imagine that students are collaborating with the DARDAR study of tuberculosis in Tanzania and doing more basic sciencey stuff as part of the biomedical innovation curriculum. So there's you sort of situate your scholarly work in the context of your career interest, but you're getting training that's particular to that work, but also something that you share with your peers. Now, if you elect to do a master's program that is outstanding and achievable, you have to dedicate time to doing that master's program. You have to, for instance, this has to be approved by the graduate council. You have to, earn enough credits to really deserve a master's program. That takes time. If you're not doing the master's program, you'll have more time in your career to do other things like electives, like additional clinical experiences. That's a trade-off that the students make currently. They sort of pick which electives they want to do, which experiences they want to do. The intent is for them to continue to do that, but to build out this opportunity that they have in much greater detail. Everybody gets electives, though. Probably more, as I said, for the students who don't elect to do this. There's master's immersion. One important piece is, you can imagine maybe somebody wants to go work on extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis in Lima, Peru as part of the Partners in Health program. Well, that's hard to do from Hanover. You really need to have an immersion experience, and a couple weeks in Lima is probably not going to take you all the way there. So we want to make sure people have the opportunity for that sort of immersion experience, too, as part of their master's scholarly work. Am I implying that would exclude people who are not getting the master's from that? Totally not. Just that's part of their master's program. And then currently, some of the great courses in our fourth-year curriculum are the capstone courses, so HSP and clinical pharmacology and advanced medical sciences. The general idea here is to try to take students who are becoming increasingly sophisticated as clinicians and scholars and sort of bring them back together for experiences together and sort of take them up to the next level and give them the chance to really polish and bring their skills more sophisticated so that they're ready for internship and ready to lead. The intent is to try to preserve those kinds of experiences, but what would they look like in discussion? And maybe that's a place to pause, is to say that I think probably each of us in this auditorium has vested interests. We all have things that we care about. We get our salary from. We have put a lot of time into. So for instance, I have advanced medical sciences is something I put a lot of time into. The fourth-year students is about to start this year. And it's something for me to sort of pause and reflect and say, I really don't know what's going to happen to that class in the coming years. We really need to have that conversation and design what would be best for our students. And I'm going to sort of do an awesome job as much as I can this year and next year. And as the curriculum gets changed, I'm going to work with it to help it be what the students deserve. So what's next? Let's have our conversation. So what's going to happen is the several working groups are bringing together a proposal that's unified to put on Chip's desk to sort of say, here's what we think the Dartmouth curriculum can be in this high-altitude context, and here's what we really think it would take to design it in detail in collaboration with the community. This is how much we think that would cost. And that conversation will begin. I would love it if Chip would say yes, and here's a tip, you can have 110% of what you've asked for, but my guess is that may not exactly be the way it's going to go. That may be a conversation. And so at the end of the day, we'll sort of finish that conversation, and that will be the resources designated to the redesign. And then we move forward under the leadership of the newly appointed Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education. And the really key piece is that I mentioned that the many working groups are working like dogs to get this proposal on the dean's table. And I think, you know, the deep dive into the details of this curriculum takes protected time. It's not something that you can do on Saturdays and evenings and maintain your sanity, I can assure you. So that detailed design process and that conversation happens when the resources are in place. So I want to begin the conversation, and I just want to remind you about this webpage. It's linked to the Inside DMS webpage. I also want to make sure that you have the chance to pick up this handout that's here that summarizes some of the FAQ question that I mentioned that's on the webpage. So if you didn't pick this up on your way in, definitely look for a copy. It may mention some things that I didn't cover. And I don't know if you've had this circulated around yet, but I'll circulate this one around. It's just a sign-in sheet, so we can kind of get a sense of who is here, and if you're interested in being contacted about something, let us know. So about those great ideas, I want to make sure that we have a conversation and you ask questions and give your ideas. I'm happy to address your questions or hear your ideas, and also a lot of the working group leaders are here too, and I'd be happy to give them the stage as well. So that's your turn. Don.
Hi, Tim. So obviously a lot of work on this. You know, to me, the most, well, I won't say the most important because I won't say the most important because obviously to be a great physician requires a lot of skill sets. But you know, I think there should be a very strong emphasis in the new curriculum on the scientific method. It underlies all of our medical knowledge, and it provides the framework for every clinical encounter. The idea of careful listening, developing hypotheses, gathering data, interpreting data, and being able to educate either your peers or your patients about how to do that. So I think there should be some sort of longitudinal exercise, if you will, around the scientific method. And I think that involves active reading of the medical literature, from the basic sciences to the health sciences. I think that getting students to do that throughout their career, first of all, it shows them that medical knowledge doesn't start and end with up-to-date. And that it's the best way to continue to inform them around the relevance of the scientific method. And it's a wonderful way to continue to integrate the basic sciences with the clinical and the health services. Now, once upon a time, there was a brief flicker of a course that some people may remember called Nature Medicine. I'm sure Lee remembers that course. And the Nature Medicine course was something we introduced into the first year. At that time, on our board of overseers was the editor of Nature Medicine, and she actually provided a year-long subscription to each of the students. And the idea was that this was a wonderful translational document, journal. And I think it was twice a month or once a month. The students and the faculty member, small groups, would choose articles, read the articles, and to me, it was a wonderful experience. I think there needs to be something like that that starts maybe after your introduction to medicine course and then goes throughout all 4 years. Because the basic sciences is more than concepts and vocabulary, as important as that is. And the students have to be able to exercise that in the framework of the scientific method. And so I would love to see some type of offering that plays onto those types of concepts.
I think that's a spectacular idea, Don. It makes me think about maybe two responses. One is that I remember in I'm trying to remember the year, but in the early 1990s in Boston, I was thinking about, I took a biology class just to keep my mind interested and thinking absolutely nothing about going to medical school. And I literally will never forget that moment walking into this big, 300-person auditorium. I was a little late coming from my job in a furniture store. And the professor was talking about hemoglobin and oxygen dissociation curve and how hemoglobin had higher affinity for oxygen until it got out to the tissues and then delivered it to the tissues. And I remember as a former English major being struck at the poetry of that incredible mechanism and just being impassioned to learn more about this. And it all sort of clicked in, and I had that moment of, this is beautiful and I can serve people with this. And I think it's a moment that a lot of people in this room have had. And I think if we can deliver a curriculum like the one you're describing that really keeps that passion alive, and so that this is fun and this is thought process and not facts, and this is processing through, and that we sort of highlight the fact that the thing that the basic sciences and the clinical science share in common is that detective work, hypothesis testing, observation over time, revision, repeat. I think we do an incredible service, and I think it would be more effective than teaching a recitation of facts. So I couldn't agree with you more. Lee? Why don't we get the microphone up just so that the folks at home can hear it.
You could have one small line item for financial planning, but it seems to me this whole scheme rises and falls on resources. As in the era of shrinking grant support, in the era of increasing clinical time being necessary, to get the protected time to allow people to develop themselves as teachers and to develop the facilities for them to teach in, which I don't think any of us would presently think are particularly good here at the medical school, seems to me it's going to take a huge infusion of resources, and I wonder if the planning is getting ahead of that a little bit. I think it would be a mistake to try to launch an innovative curriculum like this on a threadbare budget. And I know you're not in the fundraiser here, but can you speak to where that financial planning piece is?
I'm going to speak in glittering generalities, if you don't mind. So one, that planning process is above my pay grade, and so I'm not privy to the details, but I know that the dean and John Butterly and Joe O'Donnell and the other leadership of this process really know this is not a $500,000 prospect. This is something that requires a large amount of resources, because the time for real teaching and design needs to be there. And so as part of the design of the curriculum, we've been thinking about, well, what would be a budget below which the kinds of ideas we're talking about become impossible to implement? But really, I think really this begins with sort of that conversation where we sort of say, well, here is the vision, and Chip, who has been working and planning with John and many others over the last several months on amassing resources and adding up what is available for this, respond and sort of say, yes, this fits our vision and fits our capacity, and we go back and forth and refine the project to meet the resources. An incredibly important process. So I really don't envision that we'll sort of in March say, here's the proposal, and then we get a number and we go. I think it really is going to be sort of more of a number and a revision and a number and a revision. That looks about right. Okay, then now we go. And that is a long-range plan. I don't think of that as I don't think that Chip's going to commit the budget in 2015. I don't think he's going to do the math on that this year for exactly the number, but I think it's the kind of thing that has to be projected out for that many years that we really invest. Jim, yeah. Just make sure I sort of answer that question before you get started, Jim. So the other thing I want to make sure of is that, let's say it turns out that in these tight financial times, that the resources available can't accomplish 100% of the kind of redesign changes that we envision. I think it's going to be really important to think about, well, we want to change 100%, but there probably is a core piece that would be incredibly high yield that we could achieve as well and be very proud of achieving. And so I think although I envision this as a 100% change, all of this synergizing together, I think we have to be sort of in conversation about that so that sort of like I said with the masters, what we propose to do is reasonable and on its face is doable. Anyway, sorry, Jim.
No problem. The plan is pretty ambitious, and I wonder, I'm sure that the groups have thought about the time involved, not when it's implemented in the calendar and how the calendar would work. Is the calendar itself being considered, i.e., is it being considered that first year would begin earlier than it does now? And would the summer between first and second years be considered something that would be now in play for some of these new learning modules?
Yeah, that's all on the table. I think that's really important to sort of think outside of the box, that the duration of that integrated biomedical curriculum is something we have to decide what's right. And what do summers look like? Exactly when are vacations? That's all something we have to knit in there.
And what are the implications for recruiting of students, therefore, who may or may not want to do those kinds of things? Well,
so let me hit that more generally. This is a question I hear from students and faculty is, we recruit spectacular students. We recruit, I was on the admissions committee. These people are unbelievable. And they come to Dartmouth because of what Dartmouth is. And we're talking about changing Dartmouth, changing the schedule is one example. But man, this implies a lot of change. And is that going to recruit a different group of students? Is that going to, are some students going to be turned away by some pieces of it? Are different students going to be attracted by change pieces of it? I think the answer is that yes. I think these things are going to affect recruitment. I think if the curriculum looks a little bit different, different people are going to be interested in it. But what I'm hoping is that the thing that our students tell us and then also our applicants tell us is that they recognize the strengths of our curriculum and they recognize the weaknesses of our curriculum. And I think if we fix the weaknesses of our curriculum in this, that's all in the plus category. And I think if we capitalize on the avid student interest in population, healthcare delivery science, global health, these things that we can really build out with TDI and make it the kind of opportunity that they can't get elsewhere, I think will attract even better or even more diverse students. Even better. I was just telling him that. I don't really mean that. But I think we have to pay attention to that. And so a piece of this is market research. We have to figure out what the impact might be. So somebody else, yeah.
So I just had kind of two quick things. One, more of a comment. I was pleased to see the comment about wanting to be cognizant of avoiding just piling on new things. Mm-hmm. And I think I would encourage, it seems like that's something you're looking at the start, but building some sort of cyclical nature to that going forward. I think, this isn't something that's just specific to DMS, but as curriculums go on years, you add something else, but nothing ever gets taken away. And so there's some sort of overall every couple of years to say, what do we need to do to make this still as strong as it was on day one? The other thing, I just had a question about the masters, and I know you said this is something a lot of people are interested in. But from the way it looks now, it's still crammed into 4 years, and that's something where, Tufts does something very similar with their MBA and their MPH. And talking to both the directors of that program down there and people who've gone through it, they're very skeptical that you can do a full 4-year MD and a legitimate master's and give due credence to both. And so I'm wondering exactly why we're traveling down that same path where it seems like it just may not be possible without adding time.
So let me answer the second question first, and don't let me forget the first piece. So I think that's a really important question. If we're going to really make this an outstanding master's and really make it achievable, we have to ask and answer and keep asking and answering those kind of questions. So first, I think it is doable that Duke does their core medical school curriculum in 3 years, and then gives students that extra year for scientific research, an MPH at Chapel Hill, MBA, and Master's of Public Policy, et cetera. And Duke students come out very well trained and successful in the world. So it can be done in 4 years. NYU has a similar model. But that's not to say that you could do that in every institution successfully, or that every way of doing it would succeed. I think it's really important to sort of think about how you make that happen. A key piece of that is that if you take the existing curriculum and you just chopped a year out of it, that would break a lot of things. I think you have to think about what must you deliver, how do you deliver it most effectively, and what's the core stuff that needs to be taught, and what's the stuff that's being made to memorize that maybe you could access offline without just memorize being the message. So I think you have to make room for the material. And the other piece is that integration, is that the master's group is I don't think Greg is here, so I'm answering this, but Greg, am I wrong? Okay, so the master's group is giving a lot of thought to how do you, one, deliver the material most efficiently and effectively, and of course TDI has a lot of experience with different master's programs doing that, but also how to weave it into the existing medical school curriculum so that while you're in the integrated biomedical curriculum, learning about healthcare delivery science and how that informs, for instance, door-to-balloon times in the cardiology service and better care for patients with acute MIs, that you're sort of scratching 2 itches at the same time. You're doing your integrated biomedical curriculum and you're delivering the master's curriculum. You can't, it's not legitimate, I don't think, to deliver the entire thing that way, but there are points of overlap and synergy that you can kind of capitalize on so you deliver it efficiently. So that's the context, and sort of just folding that into the first piece. I think you're right, it has to be an iterative conversation. You can't sort of start out with that idea and then let it roll and forget. You have to come back and say, where are we? An example of that is we had one of the people who did the curriculum redesign leadership at Ohio State come and talk with us about some of the steps they took in their curriculum. And they really did chart out the calendar of what the curriculum looked like. We envisioned that this particular student, their curriculum on this week would look kind of like this. This is what they do from you gotta get granular to really make sure you're not just adding everything in and not subtracting. So you're right. Jonathan?
There are a couple of different audiences here, some of whom are hearing this all for the first time, and some of us who have been involved in many of the work groups, for many, many months. So I can imagine how different this hears, how differently this plays for different people. One of the things that strikes me as you've reviewed this is, and I know we've talked about this in the committees, but we need to make sure we pay attention to this, is the piece of residency and fellowship teachers. We've talked about faculty and students, but a lot of the teaching that occurs at the hands of residents and fellows. And I hope that as we go forward, we'll keep that piece in mind, working very closely with the residency training programs. And of course, it hasn't been said explicitly, but again, we've talked about involving the community faculty who provide a tremendous amount of teaching for our students, and how going forward they have to be a part of this as well. So I just wanted to emphasize those two areas.
Yeah, you could not be more right about those things. I think the community faculty is probably a point, worth expanding on, because I think you're right. That's just incredibly important. And I think one of the big logistical challenges of this is that Dartmouth is unlike many metropolitan medical schools in that the clinical context of our teaching is far-flung. And that's a tremendous strength of our education. Students' ability to get out into a variety of practices and really see how it works, not just in Lebanon and Hanover, but around New England and around the country is, I think, a strength of the program. But if you think about sort of what you're thinking about it. I know you do a lot of work. Jonathan has done a lot of leadership in this process too, been sort of a glue that's brought together several of these committees. And you can imagine from his context as a teacher of both residents and students, he's got a lot of insight into this. But so you can imagine, if you're sort of imagining delivering a new curriculum and a coherent curriculum that's unified across different students' experiences, but one student is having their primary care practice in at DHMC in Lebanon, and another one is in a community practice that's an hour away. Those are equally valid clinical context, and both of those teachers need to be supported in their teaching, and both of those teachers need to be ratified and valued and brought into the system, both in terms of its design and delivery. So you're totally right. How to do that is not so easy, but it's something we have to do. Dale.
I just wondered if you had a task force to redesign the hidden curriculum.
Tell me more what you're thinking. I think
The
that's a great
hidden
question.
curriculum, yeah. So, I worry that we do all this work to redesign what the medical students get in medical school, and then we put them into an environment where it's squashed out of them. And I don't think we can keep ignoring that piece of it. And I think we have an opportunity at Dartmouth to actually do something about it.
Amen. Do you guys experience a hidden curriculum? Are there actually different messages in the clinical sphere than you might get in say, a classroom ethics conversation? Yeah, and which one do you get more formed by? I'm guessing it's your clinical mentors who train you to act as clinicians just on your way out the door to internship have a huge impact on you. And are you critical thinkers? And are you capable of recognizing it if I'm displaying an unprofessional attitude toward a patient, or maybe doing something unethical? I think you are, but absolutely that hidden curriculum of medical school is alive and well. And how to address that is really complicated. You're right, you can diagram to your heart's content and have spectacular ideas, but if the teachers on the ground, the residents and the faculty, the fellows, all the people who really deliver this curriculum, either just sort of sing a different song or in some rare instances undermine the curriculum, it's a travesty. And so how to address that, I think, is really important. The hidden curriculum is an issue at every medical school, and we need to face it head on. And I think it's probably one of those things that you have to do piece by piece. That there are many facets to the hidden curriculum, so you have to address it in a lot of different ways. So for instance, Anne's well-being group is hitting that head on. Our students really have to deal with this, and how do we help them think it through? Because I will certainly have flaws in my communications with patients, and so the ability to help students deal with that is important. The ethics and professionalism and humanities group is a really key piece of that, is helping students be really skilled at that analysis so they can recognize it when I'm falling short there. But I think there is another piece that Leslie and Jenny and some of the others have really helped sensitize me to, is faculty development. And by that I mean more loosely the faculty that Jonathan was talking about, is that not only do we want to help our faculty have good teaching skills, sort of the tools in the toolkit, but that faculty pressures that are on the faculty, and by that I mean fellows and residents, et cetera, affect them. So how do we help support them through that to have professional behaviors? How do we address the culture of medicine at Dartmouth to make sure it's a healthy one? I agree with you. I don't think that we could do this challenge without addressing that. So we don't have one working group, partly because I think that's the mandate of all the working groups, but I'm not averse to that. I think if sort of the idea emerged that we needed to, then we need to, because that's important. Charlie?
Building on that theme, I think one aspect of the curriculum is one of the things that's been blamed for shortage of primary care clinicians, and looking at the country's needs for healthcare manpower being directed more towards primary care. I was curious if that was part of the vision of the curriculum.
I'm thinking that's partly a rhetorical question. I'm thinking have some ideas along those lines. You know, I think maybe the question is, the answer is yes, that has to be part of it. Our medical system has a lopsided emphasis on specialists. And I think the culture of medical school emphasizes the value of specialties over primary care sometimes. As a specialist, I think I contribute a lot, but I would be misled to think of myself as, you know, nearly as important in my patients' lives as a primary care physician is over time. You know, that's the core of medicine. So how do we teach to that? How do we value that? I don't know if people in the longitudinal clinical curriculum group want to talk about sort of how that goes, but in more detail. But that longitudinal clinical experience, I think, is situated largely in primary care practices, partly, not wholly, but partly because that's how you get exposure to the excellent physicians who are the core of American medicine. Other things to bring out on that? Okay. Did that get at your question, Charlie? Okay. Lee?
The only students that you've mentioned are medical students, and we have other students at this institution. And I didn't see anything on any of the diagrams reflecting a liaison with our graduate programs. What impact all of these obligations to our basic science faculty and the faculty who are teaching in other graduate programs are going to accrue as a result of an extended curriculum here. And is that a piece of this? Is there a working group that is liaisoning to those kinds of discussions to see where these efforts could either compromise our graduate programs or amplify them?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I think as you imagine changing the ways that basic scientists in particular teach the medical school curriculum, how that affects their other teaching responsibilities, or just how the infrastructure uses of a changed curriculum might impact the availability of those infrastructure resources for other learners at the institution, I think is important to think about. You know, I would say that it's probably early in the process to get into the details, just because, you know, frankly, we've thought about what the blocks might look like, but exactly what's in those blocks in the integrated biomedical curriculum, exactly how the basic scientists would collaborate with the clinicians in those immersion experiences, still being sketched out on a chalkboard. And so sort of, you know, how exactly it would affect those basic science obligations, I don't know. But will it? I can't imagine it wouldn't. Those are the same people teaching the same things, and it's in the same part of it's in the same teaching portfolio, so it has to have an impact. How do we make sure it's an amplification effect? I think that makes sense to sort of keep that part of the conversation. Will it is one possibility that you and I will both sort of spend the same number of hours teaching, but teach differently? And might other people entirely change the emphasis of their schedule in a year? I would imagine both of those are true. And when the time is right and we're actually thinking about what the resource outlay is going to be to teach a redesigned curriculum, I think then you have to deal with it. One important piece of that is that when in the proposal that goes to CHIP for the timeline of this redesigned period, I'm running out of saliva here. One of the important pieces is that the last year of that process is about implementation of the curriculum. You know, you really can't, you know, put the last dot on the last I and cross the last T and then teach it the next day. You have to ask questions like this, and so I think that sort of a group might be, most important right then. But there's another piece, you know, sort of getting to the master's thing is what's achievable. You know, you could imagine that a group of people could go off and design this spectacular curriculum that's really just not appropriate for the Dartmouth context, and that there's this other spectacular curriculum over here that they didn't design that actually would have been right for us. And so, you know, how do you avoid that sort of a problem? I think a lot of it has to do with this back and forth, is that there has to be that process of, well, it looks a little bit like this. What do you think? Come back and change it. Okay, it looks a little bit like this. What do you think? Come back and change it. So an example is that we heard from people that starting the new curriculum in 2013, you probably heard this, brand new curriculum, all redesigned in 2013. I don't think people felt that was possible. That's changed. We heard from people that a 100% mandatory master's program was sort of a difficult, sort of a stopping point in the conversation for a lot of people. Like the master's program, but like the idea of having it be elective and rolled in and built out. And so that's changed, and I think that process has to continue. So it's 7 o'clock, or actually a little after 7. So maybe if there's one last question, I can take that last question, and then if you want to come and talk after, I'm happy to stay later.
One thing that I didn't see on the flow chart or the concept map that you compared the two students was, after all this is working, was the analysis of it to see how it's working or how it's working better or how it's not working. So I think someone's going to need to be hired that has skills at understanding networks and analyzing paths to really understand how the pieces go together and understand what the nodes are that can be nudged and what the nodes are that have to be left alone.
That's really insightful. So let me say yes to that, but also even take it a little farther. So as we consider building out the faculty development piece of medical education here, really supporting our teachers so that they really support our learners, not only are you sort of thinking about how would you do it and how would you make the culture be amenable to that, but you have to be able to measure it. Well, we tried one way, and how well did we do with that? What was the impact of that, of each specific change we made? And oftentimes those people have overlapping skill sets, so they can also help advise on the measurement of it. I think you're right. It would be a lost academic opportunity also not to have done it. And that's, I think, gets at maybe a good place to at least close the auditorium piece of the conversation, is that when this curriculum gets started and moves forward, it's not done. We have to sort of say this is the redesigned curriculum as it starts, and then we're going to hear from our students, we're going to hear from our faculty, and we're going to revise in an ongoing manner. And the only way to do it intelligently is to have that kind of data on a longitudinal basis. So you're totally on the money. All right, well, thank you very much for coming, and happy to talk later.